They say masculinity is in crisis. But what if it's not dying, just being redefined by the last people you'd expect? Enter Bill Burr, the angry bald guy with a mic, who makes the world laugh while quietly dissecting the fragile foundation of modern manhood. Burr doesn't just tell jokes. He throws grenades into the echo chamber of gender discourse. In a world terrified of offending anyone, Burr walks on stage and says the things men think but don't dare admit. And here's the shocker behind the rage, the roasts. The Rants is one of the most honest, conflicted, and revealing takes on masculinity we've ever seen on a comedy stage. This isn't a speech about toxic masculinity or a celebration of outdated alpha male cliches. It's about what happens when a man grows up in a culture that taught him to bury emotion, fear, vulnerability, and prove his worth by how little he feels. Burr has never claimed to be enlightened, but maybe that's why his voice matters. He doesn't present a polished image of what a man should be. He exposes the chaos of trying to be one in the first place. Born in 1968 in Massachusetts, Burr was raised in the kind of environment that valued toughness over tenderness. His father was a dentist and a disciplinarian, emotionally distant, quick to anger, and allergic to feelings. Burr talks about this openly in his podcasts and specials, laughing through memories of growing up in a house where nobody hugged, nobody talked, and any sign of emotion was treated like a weakness to be stomped out. The damage. It's not a punchline. It's a blueprint of millions of men raised to believe silence was strength and anger was the only acceptable emotion. Burr's early comedy was fueled by that anger. You can hear it in his voice, raspy, confrontational, always on the edge of exploding. But the longer you listen, the more you realize it's not hate, it's hurt. It's confusion. It's a man trying to understand the rules of a game that keep changing without explanation. He doesn't reject masculinity. He questions the version he was handed. And through his own evolution on stage and therapy, as a husband, as a father, he offers something rare in comedy, not just criticism, but reflection. In his 2019 Netflix special paper, Tiger Burr talks about his wife, his therapist, his battles with emotional repression. The jokes hit hard, but the subtext is heavier. What if everything he was taught about being a man was wrong? What if strength wasn't about shutting down, but showing up? What if the real lesson is this: masculinity isn't broken, it's unfinished? That tension between what men were taught to be and what they're now expected to become is at the core of Bill Burr's stand-up. And unlike many public voices, Burr doesn't pretend to have the answers. He doesn't posture as a reformed man, perfectly evolved and enlightened. He brings his flaws on stage, opens them up like wounds, and lets the audience witness the blood. That vulnerability, cloaked in sarcasm and volume, is what makes his commentary on masculinity so profound. Because it's not theoretical, it's lived. Burr isn't discussing masculinity from a university podium. He's unpacking it from the inside out, one painfully funny realization at a time. In one of his podcast episodes, Burr talks about his temper, how he used to scream at inanimate objects when things didn't go his way. He jokes about it, but then admits something deeper, that it wasn't really about the toaster or the remote control. It was about feeling helpless, trapped, conditioned to believe that expressing sadness or confusion made him weak, so anger became the only outlet. And he's not alone. That experience mirrors what millions of men go through, silently expressing emotional pain only through rage, sarcasm, or complete shutdown. This is where Burr's honesty becomes revolutionary. He's not defending toxic masculinity, he's confessing its cost. He openly acknowledges that the old version of manhood made him emotionally stunted, hard to live with, and slow to grow. And yet, he doesn't swing to the opposite extreme either. He doesn't embrace the idea that men should be passive-agreeable or endlessly apologetic. He argues for balance, for complexity. and that more than anything is the lesson within his comedy masculinity isn't one thing. It's a spectrum. It's a lifelong negotiation between strength and softness anger, and accountability instinct and intention. Take his bits about marriage. They're raw, biting, often uncomfortable. He jokes about the power dynamics, the fights, the ways men and women manipulate each other. But underneath the laughs is a man trying to be better. He admits he was clueless going into marriage, that he had no emotional tools, no conflict resolution skills, no ability to articulate fear or frustration without lashing out. And he's not blaming society or women or his father. He's owning it. He's doing the work. And in doing so, he's showing his audience, especially the men, that it's not weak to admit you're broken. It's weak to pretend you're not. That's the paradox of Bill Burr. On the surface, he's the guy yelling into the mic, making fun of everything. But if you listen closely, he's quietly laying out a roadmap of how to survive your upbringing, confront your conditioning, and build something healthier without throwing away who you are. That's not comedy. That's transformation. And the fact that he wraps it in jokes, that he delivers it while ranting about peanut allergies or airline food, that's the brilliance of his method. He smuggles truth in through laughter. And once it's in, it lingers. It changes people. Bill Burr's comedy acts like a mirror, one that doesn't flatter, doesn't soften, and definitely doesn't lie. His reflections on masculinity aren't designed to make anyone feel comfortable. They're meant to force confrontation with our past, with our habits, with the way we treat ourselves and the people closest to us. And it's in this confrontation that his work becomes most impactful. Because while the crowd laughs at his exaggerations, his contradictions, and his fury, what they're really reacting to is recognition. They see themselves in the man on stage, not because they share his opinions, but because they share his questions. Why are men so angry, yet so silent? Why is vulnerability still framed as weakness in so many circles? Why do so many men only begin to heal after they've destroyed something first? Their relationships, their careers, their sense of self? Burr doesn't offer neat answers. Instead, he challenges the very premise of those questions. He questions why we still define masculinity in opposition to femininity, why emotional restraint is still mistaken for maturity, and why men are applauded for being stoic, but mocked the moment they express anything more. In one of his most telling moments, Burr jokes about his journey in therapy, not because therapy is funny, but because of how foreign it felt at first. He admits to sitting in the therapist's office, arms crossed, waiting for the session to be over. But eventually, he started to talk. Really talk. And for the first time, he wasn't performing. He wasn't lashing out. He was just another human being trying to figure out why he felt so out of control. That moment of honesty, not the joke itself, but the story behind it, is where the true lesson lies. Masculinity isn't something you prove, it's something you understand. Through Burr's lens, you realize that being a man isn't about dominance, toughness, or control. It's about responsibility, emotional responsibility, psychological accountability, the willingness to ask, what am I doing with my anger? With my fear? With my pain? And in asking that question, Burr is offering his audience, especially his male fans, a kind of permission. Permission to stop pretending. Permission to question what they've been taught. Permission to evolve. And it's working. You see it in the way his comedy resonates, far beyond the stand-up scene. His influence reaches podcasts, cultural critiques, social commentary, and yes, even men's mental health forums. People aren't just quoting his jokes, they're referencing his growth. His arc from a rage-fueled comic to a reflective father and husband isn't just entertaining, it's instructive. It shows that growth doesn't mean abandoning who you were. It means digging deep enough to figure out why you became that person in the first place. And Burr never lets himself off the hook. That's another reason his commentary on masculinity hits harder than most. He doesn't just point fingers outward, he turns the analysis inward. He knows he's been part of the problem. He admits he used to be emotionally unavailable, quick-tempered, dismissive, and reactive. And instead of wrapping that in irony or sarcasm, he owns it. There's a moment in one of his stand-up specials where he talks about yelling at his wife, storming off, then realizing hours later that he was the one being ridiculous. He laughs at himself, but not to deflect. He laughs because growth is awkward, humbling, sometimes humiliating. And that honesty, that willingness to look foolish is where the power lies. Because masculinity has long been built on the illusion of control, of having the answers, of being the rock. But what Burr reveals over and over again is that real strength comes from admitting what you don't know, what you can't control, what you've messed up. That's not weakness, that's maturity. And in a world drowning in posturing, his brand of humility is rare. Take his relationship with his daughter. Burr frequently jokes about how terrified he is of raising a little girl, not because he doubts her strength, but because he knows how little he understands about healthy emotional parenting. He wants to break the cycle to be the father he didn't have, but he's constantly afraid of doing it wrong. So he talks about it. He puts his fear into the open. And by doing that, he sends a clear message to every man watching: your fear doesn't make you broken. It makes you honest. And honesty is the first step toward doing better. This is where Burr's role as a cultural voice becomes undeniable. He's not lecturing. He's not preaching. He's not trying to sell you a course on becoming a better man. He's showing you through humor, through pain, through contradiction, what it looks like to be in the process of change. And that's the most radical thing of all. Because masculinity isn't static. It never was. It's a moving target shaped by culture, family, trauma, love, and time. And Burr is living proof that you don't have to reject your past to build a better future. You just have to face it and talk about it. Loudly, messily, unapologetically. And so when Burr shouts on stage about emotional repression, or jokes about men being clueless in relationships, or rants about the stupidity of macho pride, it's not just for laughs. It's a reckoning. A man calling himself out in front of millions. A man who refuses to hide behind masculinity, but who also refuses to abandon it. Instead, he's redefining it in real time. And in doing so, he's making space for others to do the same. This redefinition isn't about turning men into something else. It's about turning men into something more. More aware, more reflective, more equipped to deal with a world that no longer rewards emotional silence. And Bill Burr, the man who built his fame on saying the things everyone else was afraid to say, is now using that same platform to say something even more radical: that growth is not betrayal. That evolving your understanding of masculinity doesn't mean surrendering it. It means reclaiming it from the limitations of generational trauma and societal expectation. Burr's comedy acts like a Trojan horse. The audience comes in expecting to laugh at jokes about women-men politics or the latest cultural absurdity. And they get that. But what they also get, what sneaks in under the surface, is a living example of someone wrestling with their own conditioning in real time. They watch a man tear down the version of himself that was handed to him by his father, his neighborhood, his era, and then begin to rebuild. Clumsily, imperfectly, but honestly. This perhaps is Burr's greatest contribution to the conversation about masculinity, not the rage, not the rebellion, but the reflection. The fact that he's willing to contradict himself, change his mind, and question his instincts on stage is more than comedy. It's a blueprint. It shows that being a man doesn't mean never changing. It means having the guts to change in front of other people, and doing it without shame. There's a story Burr tells about learning to sit with emotion instead of exploding. It's deceptively simple, just breathing through the discomfort instead of reacting. But for a man who spent decades defaulting to anger, it's a revolution. He says he learned it in therapy after years of believing that feelings were a trap. Now he teaches himself to feel the impulse to lash out and let it pass. That practice, shared in a joke, hits harder than most self-help books. Because it's not theory. It's survival. It's a man trying to not become the worst parts of himself and inviting others to try too. And so we arrive at a contradiction that defines Bill Burr's appeal. He is a throwback and a reformer. A man who embodies the frustrations of old-school masculinity, but also its potential for transformation. He isn't trying to destroy manhood. He's trying to salvage it from the inside. And he's doing it through stand-up, one brutally honest set at a time. So now the question is yours. Are we laughing at Bill Burr because he's offensive? Or are we laughing because he's telling the truth we're still too afraid to admit? Let me know what you think in the comments. Is masculinity broken? Or is it finally beginning to wake up?